question. Mr. Ting?
So I was just going to say to the Superintendent Vital that this is just an excellent presentation. Really appreciate it. I was wondering, did your staff do this, or did you hire someone to help you present this, or what was the process you came to?
My staff actually put out a request for qualifications and found a company to help us, and they engage with the data online and then meet with us. And we still have a lot of work to do in this and how it's presented, but I felt like it was a first. And honestly, our Board of Trustees said we need something that's a lot more understandable than, so exactly what's talked about here was really from the leadership of the Board of Trustees as well.
Well, this is great. If you could circulate that person's information, I think this is a really nice way to present the information that I think is quickly digestible. So appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Adara, I did want to understand, I guess, because you said two things that sort of contradicted each other. You know, on one hand, you said, hey, we want information that we can understand, but the other hand, we don't want to make it so basic that it's not telling us anything. So what would be helpful information to you?
I think that there needs to be clarity on what can be funded, so parents know what areas to ask for or what areas to improve, because as a parent you might come in and just say, my kid's not getting what he needs, he's not happy at school, or he's not learning math, or something kind of more generalized. But if you sort of knew as a parent in the district what the priority areas could be, you could say, well, I see that this priority area kind of covers some of the concerns I have, so I'd like to advocate for that in my district. I'd like to talk to my principal or those things. But I think getting a 40 or 100-page document like the LCAP, definitely that's a lot of information. I think it's good information for some people, but for regular parents, it's a bit more than they can understand. And I read our district LCAP, and it's very hard to follow where that funding goes. And in some cases, it feels like old formulas that were used for how things are funded kind of got cut and pasted and stuck into a document and reformatted as nicely as possible, but it's sort of a kitchen sink approach. And so you kind of can't really tell exactly what program is happening at my kid's school that is helping my kid achieve. So somewhere between the kitchen sink and the micro, people need to understand what it is they, as a parent, because you only have so many years while your kid's in school while you can affect them. So you need some specific things instead of just going and complaining, saying, I'm not happy with the school.
So you're saying you'd like school-specific information, but at the same time, you do want to have a greater understanding of what the district's doing. But I guess the challenge is that, frankly, the principal at your school should really be communicating the school-specific information. I mean, I don't think it's really appropriate to put it into an overall document, and maybe that's something that needs to be worked out there. But from the overall document, what would you want to have in it?
Wow, it's a pretty big ask. I couldn't tell you. I can tell you.
Well, that's what we're tasked with.
No,
So that's
I
why
hear
we,
you.
And you're the customer, so we're trying to figure out how best to
I think
get it to you.
some bulleted target areas where we can kind of see, are we meeting or not meeting this? And so maybe if we could see at our district, is our school district already meeting these standards? So then you'd know, okay, I don't really need to worry about this, but these areas were sort of not meeting standards. So these are areas that maybe we can focus some attention on in our district. And then if we see improvements in our district, then we know the money was well spent, and if not, then maybe new strategies need to be used.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. The next panel on the governor's proposal, the budget for LCFF. Good job. Okay, so are you going to be here for a few minutes? Okay, I'm going to start with Department of Finance.
Good morning, Chair. Aaron Adelia with the Department of Finance. The governor continues to prioritize K-12 education funding by proposing to allot more than $55 billion in the 16-17 governor's budget for school districts and charter schools through the LCFF, with $2.8 billion of that going towards filling 49% of the remaining funding gap in the budget year, which also gets us to, as you mentioned, 95% full implementation in the budget year. For county offices of education, there's also just a bit over $1 billion in funding for them on their formula, and they are fully implemented onto their local control funding formula as of the end of the 2014-15 year. With that, I'll introduce my colleague Amber Alexander to share some of the other LCFF-related proposals in the budget.
Thank you, Aaron. Amber Alexander, also with the Department of Finance. The governor's budget includes 2 additional proposals related to LCFF implementation that I'll discuss. First, the governor's budget includes funding for the Office of Planning and Research to support 3 positions at the state board for purposes of supporting the implementation of the LCFF over the next 3 years. Specifically, the budget provides $548,000 in non-Proposition 98 general fund in 16-17, $572,000 in 17-18, and $304,000 in 18-19 to support these positions. The positions will provide the following activities. Position 1 will serve as the point person on the LCFF, which will include but not be limited to support for the collaborative, overseeing the evaluation rubrics, web-based system design, work on the LCAP and the annual update. Position 2 will serve as the lead on state standards, curriculum frameworks, assessment, and accountability. Position 3 will work on coordinating the new accountability system at the state and federal level. And all 3 of these positions will work on aligning the new state accountability and federal accountability systems. This workload was previously funded through a $2 million appropriation to OPR in the 2013 Budget Act that supported 2 full-time positions at the board and contracting for services. This proposal will allow for the SBE to maintain these positions that had previously been provided and ensure that we can continue to implement the LCFF formula. The second proposal that is contained in the governor's budget allocates $500,000 in Proposition 98 funding annually beginning in 16-17 through 2018-19 to the Superintendent of Public Instruction for purposes of contracting with the San Joaquin County Office of Education for support and development of the online evaluation rubrics and the web-based school accountability report card. This proposal builds upon one-time funding that was provided in the 2015 Budget Act for support of the online rubrics system. As the state's accountability system evolves over time, both the SARC and the evaluation rubrics web-based systems will require annual hosting and site maintenance. In addition, the sustainability plan for the rubrics online system lays out additional workload that will be needed over the coming years to enhance the online support of that system, including incorporating new content, improving the ability to upload information to that site, and features to align the evaluation rubrics with the LCAP and the SARC. The funding that's provided for the web-based SARC system will go specifically to support activities including but not limited to the development of the SARC web application, which is a tool that's designed to assist LEAs as they create their SARC reports. The Find a SARC feature, which is a feature for the public to use as they're searching through these reports. And then also funding for a SARC training tutorial video. The San Joaquin County Office of Education is the contractor for both the online rubric support system and the school accountability report card. And the plan is to eventually merge these 2 web-based systems over time as further development occurs. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Good morning, Ryan Anderson, Legislative Analyst's Office. We recommend adopting the governor's proposal to spend $2.8 billion on LCFF transition. It's consistent with the legislature's prior year actions and accomplishes a number of important state goals. We would like to highlight, however, a concern we have with a particular provision of the LCFF. This is the minimum state aid provision as it applies to county offices of education. And this provision ensures that as local property taxes continue to grow, that county offices will receive unequal levels of funding based not on the needs of their current student populations, but rather on which one received the most categorical funding under the previous funding system. We think this provision represents a fundamental design flaw with the LCFF. In fact, that it works at cross purposes to the intent of the LCFF, therefore recommend repeal. We'd also like to note that This is not the only hold harmless provision that's included in LCFF for county offices of education. There's a separate provision that ensures that no county office receives less funding than they received in 2012-13, and we think that provision is sufficient to recognize the legislature's interest in holding county offices harmless during the LCFF transition. We estimate that the minimum state aid provision costs the state approximately $75 million in 2016-17, but the cost is actually increasing year over year and may eventually reach several $100 million. With regards to the additional funding and positions for LCFF transition, our office is still looking into the details on those proposals, but generally we think it makes sense to provide this funding on a temporary basis. That's it.
Good morning, Deborah Brown with the Department of Education and State Superintendent Tom Torlakson. I'll be brief and just say that we continue to applaud the governor for his continued investment in LCFF, and would also urge you to adopt the governor's proposal around using the increase in funding for LCFF implementation. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Great. I did want to ask, just to clarify, and I apologize if this was already discussed, but just to understand the exact amount from finance and the LAO that's left to fully fund the LCFF. I guess LAO had a $18 million number. Is that the same number that, or I'm sorry, is it 18 million or 18 billion? I'm sorry. Is that the same number that finance has?
Yeah, that was an estimate that was made in 13-14 that our K-12 funding for the programs that were rolled into LCFF fell $18 billion short of the LCFF target at that time. The target has since increased year over year to reflect growth in COLA, and right now the unfunded gap is approximately $2.8 billion. It's about the same amount that we're providing in gap funding under the governor's proposal.
So we have about $2.8 billion to go. Is that what finance has as well?
Yes, we would agree.
Okay. And the target date is still the same. It's 2020, 2021. Is that?
Yes.
Okay. And with such a small, I guess it's not such a small gap, but I guess such a being so close to there, is there any thought that we just fully fund this sooner rather than take it all the way to 2021 or 2020, 2021?
Not currently at this point. I think there's a lot of other things at play within such a decision to where we, given the current landscape, could not support that at this time.
I'd say the big question right now is we kind of have a race between the LCFF target, which is growing at COLA, and then LCFF gap funding, which is growing no faster than Proposition 98. We've done a projection out to 1920 that shows that we're still only about 97% of the way there, because as Proposition 30 expires, Proposition 98 starts growing at about the same rate as COLA. So every year you kind of just make up for that additional amount that the target's growing, but you don't make up much ground.
Okay. A question to both groups, which is, if we look at Proposition 30 either expiring with no replacement of funding, what would be the situation? And then what happens if we're able to renew the funding within Proposition 30? What happens then?
It depends on a variety of factors, honestly. We haven't modeled yet how such an increase might impact what funding would be available for the LCFF, again, because it depends on a variety of factors. I think given an extension, all other things being equal, which is highly speculative, an increase in revenues from such a source would suggest the possibility of additional funding available. But again, there's a lot of other factors within the Prop 98 guarantee that could determine otherwise. And I would just note as well that our original estimate for full implementation by 2020, 2021 took into account the Prop 30 revenues phasing out.
I see. So, but just to clarify, what are the major factors that are of concern?
Sure. So the number of other factors outside of Prop 30 revenues are just the other state revenues, property tax revenues, average daily attendance growth, and all the other things to determine what kind of test year that we're in for the Prop 98 guarantee, which determines how much that bucket, if you will, is going to change based on those different factors.
I'd just like to add
But excuse me. So, but all those factors can be modeled in there's some general assumption. Those are fairly slow-growing factors. We're not going to all of a sudden have a significant daily attendance jump. We're also not going to see a huge spike in property taxes. Assuming as we're moving forward into the next year or two, typical growth, what are we looking at?
Think we would say that we are on track with our original estimate because that's what it was based on, was sort of the typical growth that you are speaking of.
But your original estimate you also mentioned was based on assuming that the Prop 30 funding of $7 billion was going to phase out. Is that correct?
That is correct, and at this point, there is not a Prop 30 extension that's been approved, so that's where we would have to be on that.
So then, assuming that the voters approve something in November, then I guess you would have to make revisions for the January budget.
Yeah, Ian Johnson, Department of Finance. We haven't done a projection for where the Proposition 98 guarantee would go under a Prop 30 extension example, and so all we have to provide for you is our estimates based on current law, which has Prop 30 expiring.
Okay, thank you. You were going to add, Leo?
Just to say very roughly, we estimate that Prop 30 extension would raise somewhere between 5 and 11 billion, with about half of that going to Proposition 98. In our forecast that goes out to 1920, we think that LCFF is going to be about 2.3 billion short at that time. So it's conceivable that an extension of Prop 30 would get us really close.
Meaning you're saying, based on your analysis, if there was some renewal of funding for Proposition 30, you're actually saying in the fiscal year of 17, 18, it could conceivably happen that we fully fund LCFF?
1920.
1920, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, with the major assumption being no recession, and also that the legislature continues to appropriate most new ongoing Prop 98 to LCFF.
Well, I don't think you should assume that there's no recession between now and 2020. I think you should assume that there is a recession.
Yeah, our main economic forecast assumes that there's no recession, just because predicting when an individual recession is going to start is very difficult. But I think your point that it's likely that good times will not continue indefinitely is noted.
I think that's a fairly aggressive approach, which is probably dangerous, frankly. And I think you should revisit that assumption, because it almost looks for certain. And even if it doesn't, I think to be more conservative would be more prudent.
Well, we do have a number of alternative scenarios that consider recession scenarios. What I'm presenting to you is our main economic scenario, with just highlighting, as you know, the very important assumption that under the main economic scenario we assume continued growth, which may or may not be.
Right, but the probability is pretty high that by 2020 there will be some level of slowing down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I don't have any questions for this panel. I think what I'd like to do is public comment now, because I think the majority of the public comment will be on these LCFF sections. And so if we can start lining up. Mike. Okay. And please address your comments, of course, this direction, but 1 minute or less, please.
Great.
60 seconds or less.
Good morning. Steve Ward with the California School Funding Coalition, comprised of 40 districts and 600,000 students. We are pleased the governor's proposal reflects the positive movement towards full implementation of the LCFF and contains a major influx of one-time funding. In addition, we support the LAO's recommendation to equalize special education funding to address the significant variation in funding between SELPAs. We also believe there are major must-fund cost pressures facing school districts: annual STRS-PERS increases, rising costs associated with the Affordable Care Act, and other new costs as a result of recent state and federal legislation, all of which erode every district's base funding, thus jeopardizing our ability to reach our LCAP goals. The matter of insufficient base funding for all school agencies is a conversation that needs to happen sooner, not later. Finally, we applaud the governor's proposal to have a conversation about the state preschool in California. As part of the discussion, we urge the legislature to address the lack of funding available to serve 3- and 4-year-old children with individual education programs. Studies validate that intervention programs such as preschool children for children with disabilities provide significant educational and social benefits and also result in significant future cost savings to districts. We look forward to working with you on these initiatives in the future. Thank you.
Good morning. Samantha Tran with Children Now. I think the LAO did a nice job laying out the tensions around the fiscal transparency of lots of detail and needing high-level information. In addition to any statewide solution, I just wanted to share that Children Now, in partnership with CASBO and ETW, have been working on a budget tool to try and help districts as they're describing their local budget context, and as a way to engage parents. As part of that process, we're vetting it with chief business officers and parent leaders across the state to see if we can get at the right design solutions. The State Board of Education has been really open to engaging with us on that topic, and we're hoping to help inform the template development process. In addition, I just wanted to say that we're supportive of investing in the dashboard for the evaluation rubric. There's a lot riding on it. It's being framed as a tool that will help educators in their local practice and support parents' engagement and the larger public understanding about how schools are going to do, or how schools and districts are doing around outcomes. And so we are supportive of investing in that and then making sure that that investment really is enough to achieve those goals. So thank you.
Sarah Botches with CASBO. We've recognized the need for parent engagement and tools and resources for all our LEAs. And because of that, we reached out to the Haas Foundation. We're able to generate a grant to develop said tools that will get at the problem that we are facing today. We recognize that the state does not have all the resources to help us provide guidance and instruction and training. And so this is something nonprofit organizations are trying to take the lead to get at that, generating that solution. And we wanted to make sure that you are informed, that we hear it loud and clear, but not every LEA is set up standardized. Not every LEA has the same level of resources and capacities to provide these forums, and they need guidance. And so what LAO highlighted today is exactly what we're urging the State Board and CD to recognize, that we still don't have standardization of what information to provide in the LCAPs, which is generating then the level of concerns of how much is too much and how much is not enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brian Lee on behalf of Fight Crime Invest in Kids, and we appreciate you taking a look at the accountability system in detail. It's so important because it's necessary to fulfill the legislative intent from the LCFF statute of a holistic, multidimensional assessment, and we're worried that that may not happen. The one factor that we are most concerned about is school climate. That's just such an essential part of a holistic, multidimensional assessment. And one of the problems is that we don't really, in LCFF, have a uniform school climate survey that's asked for, even though California has developed one, the California Healthy Kids Survey. So we think there's two things that you can do as a committee. One, put some dollars in the budget to support the school climate surveys. And number two, Assemblymember Weber has AB 2527 that would establish some common questions. We did a survey of the 50 largest districts LCAPs, and we found some improvement, 44% increase in how many actually have goals related to school climate surveys, but still a lot that don't have anything related to it, and very few that cover both safety and connectedness, which are both in the LCFF statute. Thanks for your consideration.
Thank you.
Good morning. Barrett Snyder on behalf of the San Diego County Office of Education. Wanted to make a comment quickly about the LAO's recommendation to repeal minimum state aid for county offices, and sort of a couched under the premise of that working against the intent of LCFF. And I think we just fundamentally disagree that one of the major signature provisions of LCFF was this hold harmless, and that's what it does. The administration met with ledge staff and county office folks and developed this hold harmless, and so we think it's built in, and you should leave it alone. It may, however, be a worthy effort to talk about equalizing county office funding over time. We're totally doing that, but doing so by cutting seems unwise, and we would encourage you to look at other ways of doing that. It's just cannibalistic, so the principle of equalization shouldn't come at the expense of others. And especially if, we're 42nd or 49th in funding nationwide. And lastly, county offices have taken on some significant additional responsibility with these LCAP reviews, and would encourage the legislature to ensure that all counties everywhere have the necessary resources to do that effectively. Thanks.
Good morning. Liz Guillen with Public Advocates. We really appreciate the subcommittee's focus on LCFF, and I want to thank staff for doing such a great job on detailing what some of the issues are. From our perspective, we want to make sure we're being understood in terms of what we're saying about transparency. We know that the grand bargain of LCFF was flexibility and ending the categorical program restrictions in exchange for transparency, accountability, which would lead to local control. So to be clear, we're not asking to go back to that categorical restriction and compliance. But we do think that a logical reaction to information about outcomes is the need and desire to change actions, and those actions are being paid for. So it's very important to understand how funds have been spent. This is both at the local level and at the state level. In response to questions earlier by some of the members, there are existing protocols about how districts are tracking funds. It's just that they're not required. And so what we would like is to have some requirement from the legislature that the districts do this in a way that's more transparent. We also would like you to support increasing or looking at supporting the need for data collection for priorities that don't currently have it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Sarah Lillis with Ed Voice. We also appreciate the robust conversation on LCFF. We are, as all of you are, incredibly invested in this working. And I think to that end, we want to make sure that all the systems are in place so that this cycle of local control with focusing on accountability, on outcomes, really works and is really addressing these persistent gaps that we have in achievement. And so to that end, we urge the committee to recommend to the board and to the department to look at where there are gaps in the system currently, and then one piece of that is on the transparency front. So we would urge them to look at having some clear summary information on both the fiscal and the outcome side. We support the governor's recommendation of having additional funds on looking at the dashboard. We want to make sure that that it's adequate for that, so that dashboard on the outcome side really is robust and is and that local parents and communities are able to engage in the conversation that's going to improve what's happening locally. And so I think we just ask that you look very closely at what those investments are going to provide, and that ultimately all these pieces of having real data transparency on the fiscal and on the outcome side are in place so that this thing will work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Jeff Frost, representing the California Association of Suburban School Districts. I just wanted to reiterate a comment that Superintendent Vitale made in her panel discussion earlier this morning about increasing the size of the LCFF base. As districts are faced with more PERS and STIRS increases, which are dramatically increasing, it puts an extreme pressure on local budgets and is having a perverse impact on the use of supplemental and concentration grants as we move forward. I urge you to consider that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and with this, we'll go to our last issue, and it's an informational item only in overview of the new federal Every Student Succeeds Act, and maybe just a high-level overview. Maybe you can touch on some of the major differences from No Child Left Behind.
Be glad to. Thank you, Chair. Carrick Ashley, Deputy Superintendent, California Department of Education. So although we now have our new federal law, Every Student Succeeds Act, which I'll refer to as ESSA, they are still working on regulations. So while I'll give you a high-level overview now, I could probably do a 3-hour workshop on what we don't know
Do
yet.
that in the interim.
But in the interim.
Yeah, we can do that in the interim. Like an interim hearing, we can do that. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So I'll be glad to come back at any time to give you an update. I will say that if you think about ESSA as being a rewrite of basically NCLB, No Child Left Behind, but yet giving the authority to the states instead of holding it at the federal level to make some key decisions. Decisions about accountability, decisions about how to assist and support schools, which is what's of major concern to most. So with the new federal law, 2016-17 is considered a transition year, with 2017-18 being in the implementation year. So in the meantime, we'll be working on a state plan over the next 8 months to put together something that will describe for the federal government how California plans to implement the new federal law. In terms of funding itself, the funding stays basically the same. The funding flows from the federal government to the states the same way, states to districts, districts to schools. There are a few minor tweaks on how that funding flows to schools and how schools are identified, but basically it's the same as under No Child Left Behind. One major difference in funding is that it it requires states to set aside 7% of its funding in order to provide a system of support to schools and districts that would be assistance, support, and then corrective actions as needed. And what you heard this morning under LCFF and the California Education Code that authorized CCEE, we're in a good position in California to meet the federal requirements and the state requirements at the same time with one system. So no longer will we need two systems of accountability, AYP and API, but a single system of accountability that will meet both state and federal requirements. Wanted to point out something that I found significant in the governor's budget summary. It's always significant to me when the governor takes time to make a comment in the budget for something that doesn't have a budget impact. And in this case, he was talking about accountability, and in that made three important points that I would like to emphasize, and that is that the new accountability system ought to be about performance and progress, not just where you are, but where you're going and how you are improving, and that no longer do we want a single index, but we want a concise set of performance measures. So as you heard this morning with local control funding formula and LCAP, we've got 22 plus metrics in the LCAP. We want our state accountability system to be aligned with those metrics, but we don't need 22 plus metrics to do that. And I think that's why the governor referred to it as a concise set of indicators. Also, ESSA requires a concise set of indicators for accountability. So we think California is in a great position because we've already started these discussions about accountability and what measures schools and districts will be held accountable to. And then lastly, let me say that we'll be working on our state plan between now and next January. It's a state plan that has to go to the State Board of Education for approval before it goes to the federal government. Again, this is a plan to start in 17-18. The federal government allowed 120 days for themselves to review the plans that come from states. So given that we want school districts to know about this plan and what's in the plan before they begin the 2017-18 school year, that means we would need to get it to the federal government by January. So between now and January, we'll be working closely together with stakeholders as well as within the department and the State Board of Education to take a state plan to the State Board for approval. We'll take a couple of drafts probably in September and November and get final approval for that plan in January. So I'll be glad to take questions. I'll be glad to come back as we know more.
Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation. I don't have any questions for you at this time. And thank you all for participating, and we will adjourn today's hearing.